He lived in a world of stone and water, a man whose heart was as isolated as the rock he stood upon. His name was Liam, and his only job was to keep a light burning for others, while his own life was lost in darkness. But the crushing weight of solitude can drive even the strongest man to a desperate bargain. A bargain he would soon learn that fate has a cruel sense of humor about. Before we sail further into this storm-tossed tale, if you're already hooked by the mystery of Blackwood Point, please take a moment to click that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who loves a good maritime legend. And let me know in the comments, from which part of the world are you watching this story unfold? Your support is the beacon that guides this channel. Now let's get back to Liam and his fateful decision. The North Atlantic was a merciless neighbor. Its gray waves crashed against the base of the Blackwood Point lighthouse with a rhythm that was both life and death. For Liam, the keeper of the light, it was a constant, painful sermon. The stone tower was his world, a lonely sentinel on a jagged finger of land that clawed at the sea. Its unpainted granite walls, slick with salt spray, were weathered to the color of old bone. The structure was simple, a spiral staircase, a small living quarters, and the great lantern room at its peak, housing the lamp that had to be kept, cleaned, and lit, without fail, every single night. Beside the tower stood a modest stone cottage, equally austere, where he lived alone. He had done so for 2 years now, ever since Isla was taken by the sea. Swept from the rocks during a squall that had come from nowhere, the silence of the lighthouse had become his only companion, broken only by the cry of gulls or the deep, mournful groan of the foghorn on misty nights. At 33, he was still young enough to rebuild, but old enough to know the profound weight of a loss that had hollowed him out completely. His hands, calloused from years of working rope and brass, trembled slightly as he held the pen over a fresh sheet of paper. The words he was about to write were simple, practical, the kind a man writes when he's forgotten the language of the heart. He needed a wife. Not for love, not for the companionship poets wrote about, but for survival. Someone to help with the endless chores, to share the burden of keeping the light burning through another brutal winter. Someone who wouldn't expect too much from a man who'd already given his heart to the unforgiving sea. To whom it may concern. The letter began, addressed to a matrimonial agency on the mainland he'd seen advertised in a month-old newspaper. I am seeking a practical woman of good character to join me as a wife at the Blackwood Point lighthouse. She need not be young or comely, only hardy and of quiet disposition. I can offer a solid roof, adequate provisions, and fair treatment. I am not given to drink or violence. Please forward this to any suitable candidate who might consider such an arrangement. He deliberately emphasized his desire for a plain bride, someone who wouldn't draw attention or create complications. Beautiful women brought storms of their own. He'd seen it in the port town of Haven's Crest, 10 miles across the choppy water. They stirred men's passions, created jealousies, and disturbed the delicate balance of a hard life. What he needed was a partner, not an ornament. Someone sturdy and sensible who understood that life out here was about endurance, not romance. Standing in the lantern room, Liam looked out at the empty expanse of water that separated him from the world. Once a week he made the journey in his small dory for supplies, enduring the suspicious glances and whispered conversations that followed him through Haven's Crest. They called him the lighthouse ghost now, though he'd once been welcomed at every gathering. But grief had changed him, turned him inward like a sea creature retreating into its shell. The townsfolk had their own rigid ideas about how life should be lived. A man without a woman was suspect, incomplete. Yet a man who sought a wife through an advertisement was equally questionable. It was a dance of propriety that Liam had long since tired of performing. Let them whisper. Let them judge. Out here, with only the wind and the waves for company, their opinions mattered less than sea foam. As evening approached, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and rose, Liam sealed the letter with candle wax. Tomorrow, he would row to town and post it, setting in motion a future he could barely imagine. In his mind, he pictured a sturdy woman of middle years, perhaps a fisherman's widow, with capable hands and a face marked by sun and hardship. Someone who wouldn't expect tender words or gentle touches, who would understand that some wounds never fully healed. The foghorn began its nightly chorus as darkness crept across the water. Liam checked the great lamp, made sure the clockwork mechanism was wound, and pumped fresh water for the morning. These rituals, performed alone for so long, might soon be shared. The thought brought neither joy nor dread, merely a sense of practical satisfaction. This was survival, nothing more. As he prepared for bed, Liam allowed himself one moment of weakness, one fleeting prayer to whatever power might be listening. Let her be plain, he thought. Let her be ordinary and unremarkable. Let her bring no beauty to tempt him, no grace to make him forget his vows to the dead. Let her be exactly what he'd asked for. Nothing more, nothing less. The Atlantic wind howled outside, rattling the thick glass of the lantern room and sending spray high against the tower. Somewhere in the darkness, a ship's bell tolled, lonely and distant. Liam pulled the rough blanket over his shoulders and closed his eyes, unaware that fate had already begun to laugh at the simple plans of practical men. 6 weeks had passed since Liam posted his letter. 6 weeks of relentless wind and dwindling hope. Then came the telegram, delivered by a fishing boat making its weekly rounds. It was brief and businesslike. Bride arriving Friday, noon ferry. Meet at dock. Agency. Friday dawned gray and merciless, the sea already churning by mid-morning. Liam dressed in his best clothes, a clean wool sweater, dark trousers, and the jacket he'd worn to Isla's memorial. His boots, polished to an unfamiliar shine, felt strange on his feet as he launched the dory into the choppy water. The 10-mile journey to Haven's Crest stretched before him like a lifetime. The settlement of Haven's Crest barely deserved the name town. It was a collection of salt-bleached buildings clustered around a single cobbled street that smelled of fish and low tide. The general store, the tavern, the modest church with its crooked steeple, and the new ferry dock that connected this forgotten corner of the coast to the wider world. As Liam's dory bumped against the pilings, he could feel the eyes upon him, see the curtains twitch in windows, hear the sudden hush of conversations. That's him. Someone whispered. Blackwood Liam getting himself a mail-order bride. About time, another voice replied. Man's been alone too long. Ain't natural. By the ferry landing, a small crowd had already gathered. News traveled fast in Haven's Crest, and the arrival of a stranger, especially a woman, was entertainment enough to draw folks from their daily routines. Mrs. Gable, the postmistress with eyes as sharp as a gull's, stood with her daughter, both dressed in their Sunday best. The O'Malley brothers, 2 fishermen with faces like weathered maps, leaned against a stack of lobster pots, passing a flask between them despite the early hour. Even Reverend Michael had found a reason to be present, his prayer book clutched in his pale hands. Liam tied up his dory and took his place on the dock, aware of every glance, every whispered comment. The minutes crawled by like hours. Then, in the distance, a plume of black smoke appeared, followed by the mournful blast of the approaching ferry's horn. The vessel chugged into the harbor with a great churning of water and squealing of ropes. Passengers began to disembark, traveling salesmen with their cases, a family heading to a new homestead inland, an elderly woman clutching a worn carpet bag. Liam searched each face, looking for the plain, practical woman he'd imagined. Perhaps she'd changed her mind. Perhaps. Then she appeared. She stood framed in the doorway of the passenger deck, one gloved hand resting on the rail. And time seemed to stop. The crowd fell silent. A collective intake of breath was the only sound above the ferry's idling engine. She was young, far younger than he'd expected, with hair the color of spun moonlight pinned beneath a simple traveling hat. Her dress, though modest in cut and fabric, couldn't disguise the graceful lines of her figure. But it was her face that struck him like a physical blow, fine-boned and delicate, with eyes the color of sea glass, and lips that needed no rouge to enhance their natural rose. Dear Lord, someone behind Liam breathed. Would you look at that? She descended the gangplank with careful dignity, a single trunk her only luggage. When her feet touched the dock, she looked up, scanning the crowd with those remarkable eyes until they found Liam. He knew he should move, should step forward and introduce himself, but his legs had turned to stone. The thought blazed through his mind like wildfire. He expected a plain bride, but the beauty who arrived made him fear his own desire. Somehow he forced himself forward. Miss... He realized he didn't even know her full name. The agency had only provided the initial E. Miss Vance, she said, her voice soft but clear. Elara Vance. You must be Mr. O'Connell. He managed to nod, acutely aware of the crowd pressing closer. of the whispers rising like buzzing flies. "She can't be serious," Mrs. Gable hissed to her daughter. "A woman like that marrying the lighthouse ghost?" "Must be running from something," one of the O'Malley brothers suggested, loud enough for all to hear. "Or hiding something. No decent woman that looks like that needs to answer advertisements." Elara's chin lifted slightly, but she gave no other sign she'd heard. She kept her eyes on Liam, waiting. "My dory's this way," he managed, reaching for her trunk. Their hands brushed as they both grasped the handle, and he jerked back as if burned. The walk to the boat felt like miles, with half the town following at a discreet distance. Questions hung in the air, unspoken but heavy as storm clouds. Why would a woman of such beauty choose this path? What secrets drove her to answer an advertisement for a plain bride for a lonely lighthouse keeper? The speculation began before they'd even cast off the lines. "Mark my words," Mrs. Gable announced to anyone within earshot. "That woman brings trouble. Beauty like that always does." As Liam helped Elara into the small boat, he caught a glimpse of something in her eyes, a weariness that seemed at odds with her youth, a guarded quality that spoke of walls built high and strong. She sat straight-backed beside him, hands folded in her lap, saying nothing as he guided the dory out of the harbor. Behind them, Haven's crest buzzed with gossip. The pretty new bride of the hermit keeper would be the talk for weeks to come. Men would find excuses to sail out past Blackwood Point. Wives would watch their husbands with narrowed eyes. The delicate balance of their small community had been disturbed, just as Liam had feared. The sea stretched before them, gray and long. Elara had pulled her hat low against the wind, casting her features in shadow. She hadn't spoken since leaving the dock, hadn't complained about the salt spray or the cold, or the obvious hostility of the townsfolk. This silence, which should have pleased him, instead made him unaccountably nervous. "It's not what you expected," he said finally, gesturing at the barren, rocky coastline. "I expected nothing," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Expectations are luxuries I can no longer afford." The words hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Liam glanced at her profile, saw the tight set of her jaw, the way her fingers gripped each other until the knuckles showed white through her gloves. Whatever had driven her to answer his advertisement, it wasn't the romantic notions of a silly girl. Something had carved away her innocence, left her as guarded as he was. They rode in silence after that, two strangers bound by necessity rather than affection, while the sea chopped and the wind blew. Neither spoke of the fears that gnawed at them, his terror of feeling again, hers of whatever shadow had driven her here. They simply endured, as people did in this hard land, putting one wave behind them and then another, while the town's whispers faded into the wind. But the damage was already done. Elara Vance's beauty had been seen, noted, judged in a place where women were scarce, and beauty scarcer still. She would be a catalyst for desires and resentments that had long lain dormant. Liam had wanted a plain bride to avoid complications. Instead, he'd gotten Elara, and with her, all the trouble he'd tried so hard to avoid. The journey back to the lighthouse seemed endless, the small dory rising and falling on the gray swells. Salt spray settled on everything, and Elara held a handkerchief to her face but made no complaint as they pitched along. The vast sky pressed down upon them, a dome of relentless gray that offered no mercy from the biting wind. As they rounded the final headland, Liam gestured ahead. There it is. The lighthouse and cottage stood before them, dwarfed by the immensity of the sea and sky. He watched her face from the corner of his eye, saw her take in the isolation, the austere simplicity of what would be her home. "It's very peaceful," she said quietly. "It's lonely," he corrected, wanting no false expectations between them. She turned to look at him then, those sea-glass eyes steady. "Sometimes lonely is what a person needs." The words struck deeper than she could have intended. He grunted and pulled harder on the oars, guiding them toward the small, protected cove that served as a landing. When they pulled the dory ashore, Elara climbed out before he could offer assistance. She stood for a moment, one hand shading her eyes as she surveyed her new domain. The small garden plot beside the cottage lay barren, victim to the salt spray and neglect. A loose shutter on the cottage creaked in the wind. "I'll get your trunk," Liam said, lifting it from the boat. "I'll show you inside." The cottage felt smaller with her in it. She moved through the main room, taking in the simple furnishings, the table and 2 chairs, the wood stove, the shelves holding a few dishes and supplies. Everything was clean but Spartan, a bachelor's dwelling with no soft touches. "Your room is through here," he said, leading her to the small chamber off the main room. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. It was... He stopped, unwilling to say it had been Isla's sewing room. "It's small, but it's private. It's fine." She set her hat on the bed, already calculating. "Where do you keep the water?" "There's a cistern out back. It collects the rain. I'll show you." They walked the property as the sun began its descent. He showed her the cistern, the path to the small cove, the shed where he kept his tools and nets. She watched intently, asking no questions but missing nothing. At the garden plot, she knelt and sifted the sandy soil through her fingers. "Nothing's grown there in 2 years," he said. "Soil's not dead, just thirsty," she murmured. She stood dusting her hands on her skirt. "With enough work and seaweed, something might grow again." The words hung between them, weighted with a meaning neither acknowledged. As darkness approached, she set about making supper with the supplies at hand. Liam sat at the table, ostensibly mending a net, but watching her work. She moved with quiet efficiency, finding what she needed, making do with what was available. Soon, the smell of fish chowder and fresh bread filled the room. They ate in silence, the lamp casting a circle of yellow light that emphasized the darkness beyond. The empty chair he'd imagined filled was occupied now, but the reality was more unsettling than the absence had been. She was too young, too beautiful, too much of everything he had tried to avoid. "We should discuss the arrangements," he said finally, pushing his empty bowl aside. She met his eyes steadily. "What needs discussing?" "I want to be clear about expectations. I advertised for a wife." "Yes, but," he faltered, searching for words that wouldn't offend. "This is a business arrangement. You'll have your room. I'll have mine. We'll work together to keep the light burning, share the chores and duties. But I'm not expecting, that is, I won't require." "I understand," she said quietly, saving him from further fumbling. "You need a partner, not a wife in the true sense." "That suits me well enough." Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by something that might have been disappointment. He pushed both feelings aside. "The work's hard," he warned. "Water has to be hauled, the lens polished daily, the clockwork wound. There's cooking, mending. Come winter, it's worse. Storms can cut us off from the mainland for weeks. I'm not afraid of work. The nearest neighbor is the sea. Town's 10 miles. It's just us out here most days. As I said, Mr. O'Connell, sometimes lonely is what a person needs." The incident that shifted something between them came 2 weeks later. A sudden violent squall blew in from the northeast, catching a local fishing boat, the Sea Serpent, off guard. Liam saw it through his spyglass, its engine dead, drifting helplessly toward the treacherous rocks at the base of the point known as the Devil's Teeth. He prepared to fire the signal cannon to alert the mainland, but the boat was too close. A larger rescue vessel would never arrive in time. The 2 fishermen aboard were waving frantically. "They're going to be smashed to pieces," Liam muttered, his heart pounding with a familiar sickening dread. Elara was beside him, her face pale but composed. "The cannon is too slow. Is there a line?" "I have a rocket line, but the wind is too strong. It'll be blown off course. Then we use the cove," she said decisively. She pointed to a heavy coil of rope in the supply shed. "That rope and the winch by the landing. If they can get a line to us, we can haul them into the cove's shelter." It was a desperate, dangerous plan, but it was their only chance. They worked together in the driving rain and wind. As Liam prepared the winch, Elara took the thick rope. "We'll need a bowline on a bight," she said, her fingers moving with surprising speed and skill. "It creates 2 loops that won't slip. It'll hold them." Liam watched, astonished, as she tied the complex nautical knot perfectly. "Where did a woman learn to do that?" he asked, shouting over the wind. "When you have something worth protecting, you learn," she shouted back, her expression unreadable. They managed to fire a light guideline to the struggling boat. The fishermen secured the heavier rope Elara had prepared, and together, man and woman, they strained at the winch. Inch by agonizing inch, they pulled the Sea Serpent away from the rocks and into the relative safety of the cove. By the time the squall passed, the 2 fishermen, the O'Malley brothers, were safe, their boat battered but intact. They looked at Elara with a new, profound respect. The incident changed everything. Liam found himself watching her not just for her beauty, which he still tried to ignore, but for her competence, her quiet strength. She worked without complaint from dawn to dusk, her soft hands growing calloused, her fine clothes replaced by practical wool and cotton. She had faced the sea's fury and had not flinched. She had helped him do his job, to save lives. And in doing so, she had become more than just a helper. She had become a partner. The nor'easter came without warning on a late autumn night, rolling in from the open ocean like God's own fury. It wasn't a squall. It was a siege. For 3 days they were trapped inside the lighthouse, the world reduced to the howling wind and the thunderous crash of waves against the stone tower. The entire structure shuddered with each impact, a constant, terrifying reminder of their vulnerability. The external storm was a perfect mirror for the escalating turmoil inside their hearts. They tried to maintain their routine, but the forced proximity wore down their defenses. Every glance held weight. Every accidental touch burned. On the 3rd night, with the storm at its peak, they sat before the small fire in the cottage's main room. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I should tell you something," Elara said finally, her voice barely audible above the wind's drumming. "About why I came here." Liam waited, not trusting himself to speak. "I was engaged once," she began, her hands twisting in her lap. "To a wealthy man back in Boston. Julian Croft." The name sounded like a curse on her lips. "My father owed him a great deal of money, shipping debts. When he couldn't pay, Mr. Croft offered a solution. Me." The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing on the walls. "I thought I could bear it. I told myself many women marry without love. But Julian—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He saw beauty as something to own, to display, like a prize yacht or a painting." The wedding preparations went on for months. The dress, the parties, everyone telling me how fortunate I was. "What happened?" Liam asked quietly. "The night before the wedding, I overheard him talking to his business partners." He was laughing about how he'd acquired the prettiest vessel in his fleet and how he would break me to the helm, just like his ships. Her voice turned bitter. "That's when I understood. I wasn't to be a wife. I was to be a possession." Lightning illuminated her face, revealing tears she hadn't allowed to fall. "So I ran. I took what money I could find and fled. I answered several advertisements before yours, but the men who responded—" She shuddered. "They all wanted a pretty ornament, just like Julian. Then I read your letter. You specifically wanted someone plain. I thought, perhaps you'd be different. But I wasn't," Liam said, self-loathing thick in his voice. "The moment I saw you, I feared." "You feared desire. So did I." She turned to face him fully. "Don't you see? That's why I felt safe answering your advertisement. A man who wanted a plain wife wouldn't see me as a prize to be won." "You're not safe," Liam said harshly. "Not from me. Not anymore." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the churning black sea. "Every day it gets harder. Watching you work, seeing your strength, your kindness. During the rescue—" He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. "I'm no better than him. Wanting what I shouldn't want. You're nothing like him." Elara rose, crossing to stand behind him. "You've never tried to own me. Never treated me as less than human. We've been partners, true partners. Partners don't feel what I feel," he said to the window. "What do you feel?" He turned then, finding her closer than expected. "Things I swore I'd never feel again. Things that terrify me more than storms or shipwrecks or ruin. I feel them too," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Late at night, I lie awake listening to you move in your room. When our hands touch polishing the lens, I burn for hours after. Is that wrong? Are we betraying our agreement?" "Yes," he said, even as he reached up to cup her face. "This wasn't supposed to happen. Nothing in life happens as it's supposed to." She leaned into his touch. "I came here running from one prison thinking I'd found safety in loneliness. Instead I found—" He kissed her then, unable to resist any longer. She melted against him, all her careful walls crumbling. The storm outside seemed to echo the tempest in their hearts, wild, dangerous, and as necessary as rain to parched earth. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back. "This changes everything," Liam said. "Or nothing," Elara countered. "We can pretend this didn't happen. Go back to our arrangement." But they both knew that was impossible. The dam had broken. There would be no rebuilding it. The storm finally broke on the 4th morning. The sun emerged, weak at first, then brilliant, turning the sea from an angry gray to a sparkling sapphire. Exhausted but exhilarated, they climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room to survey the aftermath. The sea was calm, the sky was clear, and anchored in the cove below, gleaming like a jewel against the rugged shore, was a sleek, expensive yacht. A man in a tailored suit stood on its deck, staring up at the lighthouse through a spyglass. Even at this distance, his proprietary arrogance was unmistakable. Elara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "No," she whispered, the color draining from her face. "It can't be." Liam didn't need to ask. He knew. Julian Croft had found her. The shadow from her past had come to claim his prize, and their fragile, newfound world was about to be torn apart. Julian Croft came ashore in a small launch, accompanied by two imposing men who looked less like sailors and more like hired muscle. He strode toward the cottage as if he owned the entire coastline, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path. He carried a leather satchel, and his smile was a cold, predatory thing. Liam and Elara met him outside, standing together as a united front. "Elara, my dear," Croft said, his voice smooth as oiled silk. "You've led me quite a chase, but all things of value are worth pursuing." His eyes swept over Liam with disdain. "And this is the arrangement you've made for yourself? A lighthouse keeper? How rustic." "You have no right to be here, Julian," Elara said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "On the contrary," Croft opened his satchel and produced a sheaf of legal documents. "I have every right. A contract signed by your father, legally binding. It outlines the transfer of his assets, and you, in exchange for the clearing of his debts. Debts I paid in full." He looked directly at Liam. "She is my property, bought and paid for." "She is my wife," Liam said, his voice quiet but firm as the rock beneath his feet. Croft laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Wife, I think not. I've made inquiries in Haven's Crest. No marriage certificate filed. No church ceremony. Just two people living in sin, as far as the law is concerned. I will have you removed from your post for dereliction and immorality, O'Connell. You'll be left with nothing." Liam looked from Croft's arrogant face to the treacherous sea surrounding them. An idea, born of desperation and a deep knowledge of his world, began to form. Instead of anger, a strange calm settled over him. "You claim to be a master of the sea, Croft," Liam said, his gaze level. "Your fortune comes from it. Your ships sail it." He pointed to a narrow, rock-strewn channel that cut between two jagged outcrops just beyond the cove. The local fishermen called it the Needle's Eye. That channel saves 3 hours on the journey back to the mainland. A true captain could navigate it on the outgoing tide. If you are the man you claim to be, a man who owns the sea and everything on it, then prove it. Take your yacht through the Needle's Eye. If you succeed, we will not trouble you further. If you fail, you leave and you never return." The two hired men looked uneasy, but Croft's pride was stung. The fishermen from the Sea Serpent, the O'Malley brothers, had rowed over to see the commotion and were now watching from their dory, along with several others who had heard of the fancy yacht's arrival. To be challenged by a simple keeper in front of an audience was an insult Croft could not ignore. "You think your little puddle jumper's tricks can best me?" Croft sneered. "Fine. I accept your foolish challenge. Prepare to pack your bags, Elara." Blinded by arrogance, Croft returned to his yacht and ordered his city-bred captain to attempt the passage. Liam and Elara stood on the point, watching. They could see the violent currents churning in the narrow channel, currents that only a local knew how to read. Croft's yacht, built for speed and luxury, not for nimble maneuvering, entered the Needle's Eye. For a moment it seemed it might make it. Then the tide caught it, swinging the stern sideways. There was a sickening crunch of fiberglass on granite as the yacht struck a hidden reef. The magnificent vessel listed sharply, its hull breached, crippled and helpless. Humiliated and defeated, his power broken by a simple rock, Croft was forced to accept a tow from the very fishermen he scorned. As they hauled his broken toy away, the crowd of locals on the shore let out a ragged cheer. Julian Croft was gone. Liam turned to Elara, whose face was streaked with tears of relief. He pulled her into his arms. The elder O'Malley brother, who was also a licensed lay preacher, rowed ashore. "Seems to me," he said with a grin, "that a man who can outsmart the devil himself deserves a proper wedding. And so, right there on the rocks of Blackwood Point, with the sea and the lighthouse as their witnesses, Liam and Elara were married. The curse was broken. The shadow was gone. Their future, once a terrifying unknown, now stretched before them, as bright and clear as the light that swept across the water that evening. The lighthouse, once a symbol of Liam's lonely grief, was now a beacon of their shared life, a testament to the fact that they had found in each other not what they had asked for, but everything they ever needed. If you enjoyed Liam and Elara's story, and the journey from a desperate bargain to a love that conquered all, please like, comment, and subscribe. Check out the other videos in my playlist and let me know what you think. Your support is the light that keeps me motivated and helps me bring more stories like this to you.